In this episode, Marco Lambertini will share his expertise on transitioning to a nature-positive economy, focusing on how governments, businesses, and society can work together to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. Drawing on his leadership at the Nature Positive Initiative, Marco will explore the policy shifts, financial incentives, and business strategies required to create a global economic model that actively contributes to biodiversity restoration. And on the set today, we have Marco Lambertini, the convener of the Nature Positive Initiative. Welcome, Marco.
Hi, Dorothy. Thank you very much for having me here.
Marco, what is the Nature Positive Initiative?
So let me say maybe what's nature positive.
Exactly.
And then the initiative follows.
Yes.
Because nature positive is a term that is now taking root and is being used increasingly by a number of actors in society, governments, businesses. And maybe I'm going to tell you first what nature positive is not. Mm-hmm. Nature positive is not a slogan.
It's not a slogan.
No, it sounds like a catchphrase. It sounds like another eco-friendly type of word.
Yes.
But actually, nature positive was coined and designed and launched 4 years ago to be the global goal for nature. Mm-hmm. So we had Paris developing the carbon neutrality concept of net zero emissions by 2050. Mm-hmm. Nature positive is the response to that from a nature perspective. So it's net positive biodiversity. It's more nature, not less, by 2030, by the end of the decade. Mm-hmm. So it's a measurable global goal that wants to drive society to change the way we live, we produce, we consume from nature negative today to nature positive tomorrow. Halt and reverse nature loss and net positive biodiversity. Net zero emissions, net positive biodiversity. Because, Dorothy, contrary to climate, that has got a long time to recover, nature can come back so quickly.
Can come back quickly or can't come back quickly?
Can.
Oh, really?
We have so many examples around the world, local examples, forest regeneration, wetland recreation, wildlife return, that, if we do things in a different way, if you allow nature to come back, nature has an incredible regenerative ability. So that's why nature positive is not only necessary because we're losing so much nature and nature is so fundamental to all of us.
Yes.
But can happen, is possible. And so that's a beautiful vision. And the two together, net zero emissions, net positive biodiversity, nature positive, are the two, if you like, interconnected global goals that will drive a safer and more sustainable future for all, particularly for the new generations.
So nature positive is a global goal on nature.
Is a global goal for nature, has been endorsed by the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. The mission of the convention, agreed 2 years ago in Kunming, Montreal, is talking about halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. So in nature positive. Halt, but also reverse. So bring nature back.
And then what would nature negative then mean?
It means what we are doing today.
Oh.
That basically we have been losing nature, impacting nature, and nature is been declining steadily for many, many years, but particularly in the last 70, 80 years, when the big economic boom, consumption and production has happened. Scientists call those last 70, 80 years the great acceleration of unsustainable use on natural resources.
Great acceleration on unsustainable use of natural resources.
Everything you can think of, water, energy, minerals, fish, timber, everything in terms of consumption has been going like this. And of course, nature cannot cope with the pressure of that kind. And so we are still in time to change the way we produce and consume in a way that we continue to sustain our development, particularly in regions of the world that needs more development, but without destroying nature. And until now, our development model has been based on the destruction of nature. So human development, human prosperity, human advances from life expectancy to disease control has been improving a lot over the last 100 years. We made a lot of progress. But that has come at the expenses of nature. And as nature is declining, she will not provide that support any longer.
Yeah.
And so what happens? Our development will actually hit the ceiling and potentially begin to regress.
Yes.
So that's where the danger, the threat is. That nature that we have taken for granted forever now is beginning to weaken, to decline to a point. They won't be able to provide all the goods and services that we enjoyed until now.
But Marco, we need to eat. We need to live in homes.
Yeah.
We need timber.
We need.
Then what can we do? Because we need all these things.
There are plenty of examples of ways of continuing to use the resources that we need, from fish to water to energy to, as you say, timber, in a way which is sustainable, in a way that is within the limit of what nature can regenerate. Because right now we are passing the limit.
Yes.
And Dorothy, you know very well, it's not just about the type of use, it's also the waste. The waste that of all of these resources that is completely unnecessary. With a smart management, with a smart way of producing and consuming, both sides, consumption is as important as it's driving production. We can actually live within the planetary boundaries, within the boundaries of a planet that can continue to provide those resources to us. We are a lot, we grew a lot in terms of population. We are at 8 billion, we'll become 10 billion by 2050, but everybody is clear. The planet can provide all the resources that we need for 10 billion people if we use sustainably, if we maintain the ability of nature to regenerate those resources. Today, we're catching fish faster than they can reproduce, we're cutting trees faster than they can grow, etc., etc. And that has to change. It's not like this is the only way. It's actually the way we've been used until now, but we can change the way, and in our own interest as well, of course, of the other amazing life forms of the planet.
You know, Marco, you mentioned that nature regenerates quite fast.
Yeah.
Now, coming from financial services, coming from the investor's perspective, we are made to understand that the returns, or rather that, the impact is long-term, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years. Yet we need to see these returns, as an investor, within a few years. So how do we actually balance that?
Look, there are plenty of examples of coastal communities that turn from exploitative fishing to sustainable fishing, which are simple practices that are less destructive, better in sync with the reproductive cycle of fish, and they turn their waters from completely overfished to full of fish again. There are plenty of examples of forests that have been degraded and come back. Now they're sustainably used. And so we can do this if we just pay attention to nature and to the need for nature to regenerate itself. It's definitely possible. It's just a question of a mindset shift where we stop taking nature for granted. We stop thinking that we can take and take and waste without consequences, because that has been the approach until now.
And nature cannot speak.
Nature cannot speak.
It can scream.
Nature cannot speak, but can scream.
Yes,
You're absolutely right.
Can scream.
And it's screaming now. Climate change is screaming at all of us. Again, fishing communities on the East African coast, they see the fish disappear.
Yes.
I used to go to my fish market with my mother every day before going to school.
Yes.
My mother was a saint. I mean, imagine taking me to the fish market before going to school, because I was so keen on fish.
Yes.
To see all this beautiful fish. Imagine I was born on a seaside town in Italy. At that time, this was 40 years ago, 45. At that time, 100% of the fish on the fish market was coming from the local waters, the local sea. You go back to the same city, the same fish market today, 90% of the fish are coming from far away.
Wow.
And that's one of the problems. Nature is declining, but not everybody appreciates the decline. Because the fish is still on the market, but it's not the same fish. It's coming from far away. That means that we have already exhausted the fisheries locally, and now we are beginning to take from far away.
Yes.
And what happens when that far away fisheries are also overfished?
Yes. And so the Nature Positive Initiative then seeks to, is it speak for nature?
The Nature Positive Initiative is an initiative that basically wants to communicate the importance of this transition, a transition from a nature negative culture and an economic system that does not value nature for the material contributions that it gives to us, and as well as spiritual, cultural, emotional. Nature helps us in so many ways.
Exactly.
We have plants here on the back. Why? Because we need nature around us. We just need it. It just makes it so much more beautiful. Right? Yeah. So we need nature, but we just never thought about it because nature was always around. Now that it's beginning to disappear, we got to better think about it and give nature the proper value that deserves.
And so the initiative convenes
organization like yours.
Yes.
Because you remember.
Yes, we are members. Anka is a member
and
of
many
the NPI.
others. Yeah, many others. And the exciting thing for me is that you coming from the finance world, other organizations come from the nature conservation world, there are organizations coming from the business, real economy world. So we are coming together from very different corners of society and economy. Yeah. All, however, united by the idea that we need to halt and reverse nature laws. We need a nature positive future, or else not the pandas, the tigers, the elephants, but us will pay the price.
We will
as
pay
well
the price.
as all these other creatures.
Yeah.
And so there's a completely new narrative now. Nature conservation is not any longer an isolated issue. It's an issue that affects economy, society, well-being, health, happiness of people. And particularly is a justice issue. Because the most vulnerable population today are suffering from climate change and nature loss, and the future generations, our children and their children, will inherit a very difficult future, very difficult. And science is crystal clear, Dorothy, crystal clear. We're heading towards real dangerous tipping points. This is not doom and gloom. This is now science.
It's real. The science is speaking. The data is speaking for itself.
Yeah. So we need to change. It's like we jump on a train for the wrong destination.
Yes.
Now we need to, as quick as possible,
to come back.
Otherwise, the return ticket is going to be very expensive.
And do you think we can come back?
That's a good question. I hope we can.
Yes.
Yeah, because, at the end of the day, we're intelligent creatures, right? We're a bit short-term, we're a bit reactive, we're a little bit greedy, we're a little bit selfish.
Yes.
But if we begin to understand that all these nature laws, climate change, is actually something eating us, eating our future, our family, our children, I think we will react. The question is, we will react in time before nature really start collapsing. The Earth systems that has been stable for 10,000 years are beginning to change, like climate.
Yes.
If they change too much, they can reach a point where actually they don't return. The world will look and will behave very differently. Earth systems will be completely different. We're already seeing that in climate, but nature, meaning the other dimension of nature, including biodiversity, forest, wildlife, fish, will do the same. So there are points of no return that we should absolutely avoid. So there is a strong urgency to change.
And do you see governments seeing this and playing a role in trying to reverse nature loss?
Yes, definitely. So I've seen, I was born at the beginning of the Great Acceleration,
and
I've seen it all.
Yes.
And at the time, there was absolutely no attention to nature or to climate. Zero. It was all about economic growth at any cost.
Yes.
Now, 2 years in Paris, the government agreed on a climate change plan. And 2 years ago, they agreed on a global biodiversity plan.
Yes.
So, yes, I think we are the most environmentally aware generation of all times. The question is translate that awareness into action and change, and maybe also begin to be ready to behave differently, to think differently the way we produce, particularly the way we consume. Because, government, businesses have a super important role to play. But at the end of the day, let's not forget, each individual has a super important role to play as citizens, as voters, as consumers.
Yes.
So we need to internalize that also in our own behaviors. It's not just, it's not enough to criticize the government or point the finger at the company, because we are the consumers of nature in our daily life.
And Marco, how do we participate if we don't have data, or if we are told the science is complex, or if we think the science is complex?
Yeah.
How do we do that?
So the data are there.
Yeah.
And the question, however, you're right, and this data need to be made personal. People need to understand what this data, this crisis, these threats mean to them. But also, it's not just about threats, because of course we are living in a dangerous time. Because if we don't move fast, there will be really serious consequences. There are already serious consequences.
Yes.
People are dying of climate change today. People are migrating, forced to migrate climate change. So the effects are already there. It could happen, and everywhere. It's not just the poor countries or developing countries. Everywhere, everybody is hit, and so. The data are there. We need to actually translate that into something that, on one hand, create urgency, but on the other hand, offer hope and opportunity, and particularly a stimulus to act. And that's where the balance is important. We are in danger, but that danger is not something that we can't avoid. We can avoid a dangerous situations. We change now. There are consequences, but it's all about choices at the end. So we can choose, because we are the cause of all these problems these days. And as we are the cause of the problem, we can be the solution too.
Yeah. And Marco, I am aware that, the NPI is working on a state of nature metrics.
Yeah.
Why?
Exactly, to answer the question you asked before, totally, because unless we agree on a credible but also practical way to measure progress in reducing our impact on nature. And you're coming from finance, so measurements is everything, right?
Yes, we need the data, we need
the data, we need the metrics, we need to monitor.
We need to provide assurance.
Or
we need to be given assurance of what we're reporting on.
Right.
Yeah. So
it seems a bit of a technical thing. Actually, it's not, because unless you measure the impacts and as a consequence, you increase your response to mitigate those impacts, and you measure progress. You will never know whether you're doing enough. On climate, it's very clear. Net zero emissions by 2050. So each country, each company, each financial institution needs to align to the global goal of net zero emissions. On nature now, there is a new global goal, which is net positive nature, net positive biodiversity, and nature positive. And so now, it's much younger, the concept, so it started just a couple of years ago. And so it's our job to provide tools to society, to the economy, to companies, to investors, to governments, to begin to develop a plan and measure the progress of that plan towards a nature positive future. That's why we work on metrics which are credible, but also practical, simple, understandable. Because nature is so complicated, you can't measure everything. But you can measure the key elements that are indicators of the state of nature, and that's what we're trying to do as a coalition.
And so what are some of the challenges that, I know we've spoken of a few, but if you could pick two of the top challenges in your day-to-day work, what would those be? One is a cultural challenge, probably the biggest of all. And again, we have been growing as a species. For 99% of our time on the planet, we've been in nature, and nature is tough. Yeah. Nature is tough. And so, living in nature is tough, like for any other wild animal. Yeah. So we tried, with our ability, cognitive ability, intelligence, we tried to separate ourselves from nature and protect ourselves from the dangers of nature, predators or lack of food or diseases. So we created this kind of modern human society that has tried to push nature aside. We bring nature in our flats, but we don't bring dangerous animals or stuff like that. So we isolate ourselves from nature. Yes. And that has created this disconnection that is probably the origin
of this relationship, which is almost of love and hate, and particularly of negligence and disconnect. So we eat every day. We actually don't understand. We don't know. We lost the sense of the footprint that the food is having on nature. We buy something in the supermarket. We have no idea the ecological impact of that food. And so we are disconnected. That's one of the main culturally disconnected from nature.
Over time.
And we need to reconnect to be able to appreciate what nature gives to us and stop taking it for granted, because it depends on how wise we are in using it. So that's probably the biggest challenge at the societal level. And then, of course, the second challenge is that, now that the system has been nature negative for so long, transitioning to a nature positive requires a lot of change. Regulatory change from government, new investment in new technology, cleaner technology. And those changes are costing money in the transition phase. They will deliver a lot of benefits later on. But during the journey, requires some significant shifts. And some companies, for example, some government get it, and others still try to squeeze the old business as usual investment as much as they can. And that's another big challenge. That's where government regulation, I think, is very, very important.
And what kind of regulations? I mean, regulations could be about plastics and pollution to...
regulation in terms of asking companies to assess their impact, asking companies to show a reduction of their impacts, whatever their specific impact is. Because companies have different impacts. So a fishing company is different impact from a forestry company or from a plastic manufacturing or clothing. So every company needs to assess their impact first, understand their impact, and then address their impacts in the most opportune way. But through the metrics, measure progress. So to demonstrate that actually they are transitioning, they are moving towards a nature positive outcome. And that's absolutely possible. Many companies have started the journey. Many more should start as soon as possible.
If you're to speak to the financial sector, speak to the asset owners, the asset managers, institutional investors, what would you say?
The same thing, except for an investor, rather than looking at their operations or their supply chain like a company, they should look at their portfolio, and drive the change and incentivize the change and penalize the lack of change vis-a-vis nature. We're seeing some of that happening on climate, right? Some investors are beginning to set some rules in terms of divesting from certain climate negative activities and incentivizing cost of capital and everything climate positive. Same needs to happen in terms of food production, in terms of forestry, in terms of fishing, in terms of infrastructure. Any nature positive transition, any transition demonstrate nature positive outcomes should be incentivized by the investors through their portfolio. And some portfolios are easier to deal than others, but I mean, it's a question of starting the journey and improve over time.
And what's the role of international collaboration?
That's fundamental, because we have such a globalized economy now that, it's not like this transition can happen in one country and not in another one, because the supply, the value chains are across the world. So it's really, that's why nature positive is a global goal. It's a global goal for society, and everybody needs to play their part to deliver it. And, it's such an exciting opportunity. Imagine, this generation has the ability to rewrite the new phase of human development in a different way. And we're holding the pen. We are holding the pen, nobody else. So we can actually rewrite it in the way that is safer for our children and the rest of life on Earth.
So Marco, if you go back to, your personal life, how did you get into this space?
I didn't choose.
You didn't choose?
No, it's one of the things where you're born. There was a book written by a social biologist.
Yes.
Difficult term. They basically look at how people in society connects with nature. And he came up with a theory.
Yeah.
It's called the biophilia theory, hypothesis, that basically says, look, we all came from nature. We spent, as a species, we spend so much time on nature that everybody inside, genetically, is affiliated, attracted,
Really?
and connected to nature.
To nature.
And it's true. Again, the plant in there,
Yeah.
people have pets.
Yes,
You go in a
yes,
park
yes,
for a
yes,
walk, you don't
yeah.
go in the middle of a traffic jam.
Oh my
You
goodness.
walk in a park.
Yes, yes.
And
yes.
so everybody actually has that affiliation to nature. And you can tell just from the kids, when a young kid sees an animal or you bring a pet home, they kind of go crazy, right?
Exactly.
So the contact with nature is so fulfilling. But we lose that as we develop and we in this artificial world we created for ourselves. And so in my case, I was, born biophilic.
Biophilic.
Yeah, I still remember my mother telling me when I was 3 years old, one day she opened the cupboard in my bedroom and it was packed with bags, shells, sleeves.
Yes,
I was picking up things and she didn't even realize.
A little scientist.
I was always fascinated by nature.
Yes. And
here we are. 50 years later, I'm still fascinated by nature. Yeah.
Convening.
Try to do my best to help. That's it.
Wow.
Nothing more. Yeah.
Wow. If you had a magic wand and all you needed to do was close your eyes and, flip it, what would your wish look like?
I have a politically incorrect that I hope is not going
to
be misunderstood.
Go ahead, please.
I think it's going to be misunderstood.
Yes.
I will take out of the human genome the selfish gene.
Okay. Wow.
Because honestly, a lot of the problems, and not just about nature, Dorothy, is about people, relationship between people.
Yes.
It's all about selfishness.
Yes.
And if we could avoid that and think more altruistically, empathetically, towards ourselves and towards the rest of life that we share the planet with, I think the world will be a much better one. So that's my magic wand solution.
Wow.
Not an easy one, but
it's not an easy one.
It's magic.
But when we begin to talk and we begin to understand and we begin to become conscious, then that selfishness then starts to diminish.
Completely right. But, and it's not just diminishing. I think it's more like, so we are selfish.
Yes.
And we our main issue is, main preoccupation is survival.
Yes.
That's natural.
Yes.
Every
yes.
species is like
yes.
that. It's not any different.
Yeah.
So if we internalize the fact that destroying nature, destabilizing climate is affecting us, the selfish gene triggers a response, say, wait a minute, this is a danger, so let's stop.
So it works in that context.
That's what's happening to a lot of people now.
Yeah.
As soon as they realize that climate change is a danger, and it's not necessary that we embrace, we face this danger, because we can actually avoid the danger by, for example, shifting to renewable energy. That's what's happening now. Last year, for the first time in the recent history, modern history, there have been 3 times more investment in renewable energy from investors than in fossil fuel. So people are beginning to get it. Investors are beginning to get it because they are seeing climate change as a major problem, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So I'm afraid, we need that realization of the threat. Back to our evolution, you react to threat, and then if you see the opportunity to avoid the threat, then you take it and you embrace it. And that's what's happening on renewable energy. We need to do the same with food.
Yes.
Food is the second big threat moving forward. Unsustainable agriculture, excessive use of chemicals, both in meat and in crops. It's just, if you think about it, it's crazy. It's been useful to improve food production, but now it's beginning to actually have an impact on health.
Yes.
On our health,
on
our children.
Health, our children, exactly.
And it's just, if you think it's nonsensical, we're poisoning our own food.
Yes, yes.
So we got to really utilize nature capacity to regenerate, to, produce food in a regenerative way, maintaining soil fertility instead of adding tons of chemicals, and that can work, and it can work well. And consumers need to stop wasting food, maybe reduce their footprint in diets, and I think we can all provide food to everybody at the level that is needed, good, nutritious food, without destroying nature as we've done until now.
You know, one thing that has always fascinated me about this science is the role of pollinators. Why?
Because 2/3 of the crops that we produce are pollinated by animals.
Yes.
And they're not replaceable by, people going around free.
You can't go around
Well,
trying
they can,
to...
but for small areas. And it's very expensive.
Yes.
So it's exactly. And pollinators is a classic example.
Yes.
We spray our crops with pesticides that kill the very pollinators that produce the I mean, if you think about it, there are plenty of paradoxes.
Yeah.
That has to be acknowledged and resolved.
Wow.
Yeah.
Marco, a final word for our viewers and listeners.
The final word is that when we talk about nature positive, is as much as about nature as about people.
Wow.
And so nature positive is the only way to achieve a people positive future.
Wow. Nature positive, the only way to achieve a people positive future. Marco, thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Dorothy.
And there you have Marco Lambertini, convener at the Nature Positive Initiative.
Thank you. That was great.